Salvete. It's important for Latin students to have some understanding of ancient Greek culture and life because the Romans did. Any educated Roman would have had an understanding of Greek literature, Greek philosophy, certainly the Greek language, and it makes sense when you think about where Greece and Italy are geographically. If you look at the map, Greece is obviously right next door to Rome. In fact, the southern area of Italy was referred to as Magna Graecia, or Great Greece, because so many Greek settlers lived in that area. So it's important for Latin students to have, like I say, some understanding. And we're going to start that off with a look at some Greek philosophy through one of the most famous of the Greek philosophers, Plato. Plato lived from 428 to 348 BC. And one of the reasons he's so famous is because of who his teacher was, Socrates. Now, put together, Socrates and Plato form the foundation of Western philosophy. Socrates didn't write anything down. He simply went around asking questions, talking about ideas with people. But it was his student Plato who wrote down a lot of the philosophy of Socrates himself and then put in his own ideas as well in what we refer to as dialogues. The dialogues of Plato were basically like scripts, if you will, with characters speaking, talking about various philosophical ideas. And one of the characters in many of his dialogues was Socrates. So you want to be careful to distinguish between the character Socrates and the actual historical Socrates. Now, we don't really know if the historical Socrates actually said the things that Plato puts in the mouth of his character Socrates, but we can assume that it was probably pretty close. You're getting ready to read a couple of those dialogues, or parts of a couple of those dialogues, and you're going to find the link to the text here in this video. You'll see it in the description to the video and on our website. The first philosophical work you're going to read is The Republic, and you're going to read selections from books 5 and 7. In book 5, the characters Socrates and Glaucon are talking about the education in the ideal state or the ideal republic. So when you read the text, anytime you see a large amount of talking, that's from Socrates or the character Socrates. And when you see short little responses like yes or I agree, things like that, that's from the character Glaucon. You may find some things that surprise you about what Plato had to say of education this far back in antiquity, especially when it comes to equality and how men and women were to be educated. You might also be shocked a little bit by some of the things that Plato had to say about how human beings should breed. He actually talked about producing a master race. And as soon as you hear that phrase, that should conjure in your mind memories of World War II and the Nazis. And indeed, Plato was one of the favorite philosophers of some of the Nazis. So it's something you want to try to get your head around. In the same book, Book 5 of the Republic, Plato is going to say some wonderful things I think we would all agree with regarding education. But he's going to say some other things that most people would not agree with today. So one of the challenges and tasks of a student is to pick out the things that are good, take those things, use them, make them what you will, and reject the things that you know to be wrong. Then in book 7, we're going to read the famous allegory of the cave. I'm going to show you a diagram that I usually draw when we're in class, and you might want to draw this in your notes as well. The allegory of the cave, Plato's going to describe a group of people in a cave, and we're going to draw this kind of from the side view or a cutaway view of the cave. And you'll notice that the floor is sloping upward as it goes back towards the entrance. And he describes a group of people who are chained facing a wall their entire lives. And behind them, slightly above them, is a wall, and behind the wall there is a fire. And between the fire and the wall, there are puppets being held up by other people. And so we'll here have the image of a tree, a horse, you'll have to forgive the stick figure horse there, a human being. And because the fire is behind the puppets, they cast shadows on the wall. And that's all that these people know. And they think that's reality. And then one day, someone gets free and begins to walk up and out of the cave. And the first thing that he notices is the fire. And his eyes are blinded a little bit. But then he takes a look at the puppets, and he realizes, oh, those must be the real things. Everything I've been looking at so far has just been shadows and fake. And then he gets to the outside of the cave, and the process repeats itself. He sees the sun, which is an even brighter fire. And once again, his eyes are blinded a little bit. And all that he can see are the reflections of actual objects in water, like the tree and the horse. And he thinks those are real. And then finally his eyes grow accustomed to the light, and he's able to see objects for what they really are. And he decides, hey, I need to go back to my friends who are in the cave and tell them the truth. And this is an explanation, at least in Plato's mind, of how we come to know things. Initially, we know things that are really not much more than shadows. We think we have some understanding. Think about when you were in elementary school, you thought you really knew things. And then you got to middle school and high school, and you began to see things for what they really were, and you understood more clearly. And every time you made a transition, it was a little bit difficult, just like that prisoner who got released from the cave. It was a little bit blinding, but eventually you get to truth and true knowledge of things. The second dialogue you're going to read parts of is a dialogue called the Theaetetus, which is named after the main character in that dialogue, Theaetetus, who, along with Socrates, talks about the nature of knowledge. What is knowledge? What does it mean to know something? And they begin by working over a statement by Protagoras. Protagoras was one of the pre-Socratic philosophers, or those right before the time of Socrates. And he was famous for a statement, man is the measure of all things. And so Theaetetus and Socrates begin discussing this. If man is really the measure of all things, then what does that mean for knowledge? Is it possible for anybody ever to be wrong about anything? How do we actually know what we know? So I think you'll enjoy reading these two dialogues. It'll give you a little taste of Greek philosophy and a little bit of a window into the world of ancient Greece and Rome. Later.